These disturbing historical photos were recently discovered. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most? At dawn in 1950, fishermen steered their boats into Kumkapı, Istanbul, after a night on the Sea of Marmara, their faces marked by cold and fatigue. Archival photographed them beneath a storm-dark sky, transforming a routine return to port into a powerful portrait of working Istanbul. During Zapad 81 in September 1981, Soviet troops marched past rows of tanks in one of the largest military exercises ever staged by the USSR. The drills rehearsed rapid armored warfare across Eastern Europe and served as a calculated display of Warsaw Pact power during the Cold War. At 8:32 a.m. on May 18, 1980, a hiker on Mount Adams watched Mount St. Helens erupt about 37 miles to the west in Washington state. John V. Christensen captured the towering ash cloud as it expanded across the horizon, and the image was later published by National Geographic in 1981. In 1973, Bobby Onko raised his rifle during a ceasefire between American Indian Movement members and federal marshals at Wounded Knee. The photograph became a defining symbol of the occupation and was later reproduced on the widely recognized Remember Wounded Knee poster. Between 1887 and 1889, 300 workers assembled the Eiffel Tower from 18,038 iron pieces held together by about 2.5 million rivets. Built for the 1889 World's Fair, the 300-meter landmark rose above Paris in just 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days, becoming the world's tallest structure. In 1969, Layla Khalid of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine posed with an AK-47 after rapidly gaining international attention. That year, she took part in the hijacking of TWA Flight 84, becoming one of the most recognizable figures of the Palestinian militant movement. Discovered in 1997 at a depth of 48 meters off Palawan, the Lena Shoal wreck carried more than 5,000 objects when it sank around 1490. Among its Ming-era ceramics was this rare blue and white plate showing a flying elephant, evidence of maritime trade linking China and Southeast Asia. In September 1914, a Russian soldier stood beside a battlefield grave in Galicia containing 50 Austro-Hungarian troops and 11 Russians. The burial followed the Battle of Galicia, where friend and enemy were often placed together in the same earth once the fighting had moved on. In January 1911, Lewis Hine photographed breaker boys at the Ewan Breaker in South Pittston, Pennsylvania, sorting slate from coal by hand. Their lamps, tired faces, and dust-covered clothes helped expose the harsh child labor that powered America's rapidly growing coal industry. In 1977, Virginia Park Ranger Roy Sullivan survived his 7th recorded lightning strike, the last in a 35-year series that began in 1942. His extraordinary record remains unmatched, and this scorched hat became a stark reminder of the storms that repeatedly found him in Virginia. Taken on an Iranian beach in 1979, this photograph captures women sunbathing in Western-style swimwear only months before the Islamic Revolution transformed public life. Within a year, new religious laws imposed strict dress codes, making scenes like this almost impossible in public. Around 1958, 2 Detroit policewomen practiced pistol shooting at the department range, training with the same precision expected of male officers. At a time when women were largely confined to clerical and juvenile duties, scenes like this marked a quiet shift in American policing. In 1911, experimenters launched a camera high into the air to photograph the crowd below, creating a crude ancestor of the modern drone shot. The device used a timed shutter and returned by parachute, capturing an overhead view decades before practical unmanned aircraft became common. In 1959, 13-year-old Dolly Parton posed for this school portrait in rural Tennessee, years before Nashville knew her name. She was already singing on local radio and television, and within 8 years, her first charting single would launch one of country music's greatest careers. After Hurricane Andrew struck South Florida in August 1992, a woman relaxed in a bathtub surrounded by the wreckage of homes and shattered palm trees. The surreal scene captured the scale of the storm, which destroyed more than 25,000 homes and left entire neighborhoods unrecognizable. In 1875, Knud Knudsen photographed Tromsø's main square, crowded with townspeople, fishing boats, and wooden warehouses beneath snowy mountains. One of Norway's earliest street images, it preserves daily life in a remote Arctic port before modern development transformed the town. In 1916, a female railway conductor worked aboard a London train, checking tickets and assisting passengers while men served in the First World War. Women kept Britain's transport network running, but many lost these positions after the war, when the jobs were again reserved mainly for men. Around 1930, a young Native American mother held her child beside the tracks at a railway station, both dressed in traditional clothing. The image preserves a quiet moment from an era when railroads were reshaping travel, trade, and indigenous communities across the United States. In Balad, Iraq in 2003, 2 U.S. Army soldiers comforted each other after 3 critically injured Iraqi children were brought to their base for help. The children were reportedly denied treatment, and the soldiers' reaction became a stark image of the human cost of war. Before Rocky made him famous, Sylvester Stallone sold his beloved dog Butkus for about $40 because he could no longer afford to feed him. After the film was approved, Stallone reportedly paid $15,000 to get Butkus back and gave him a memorable role alongside Rocky Balboa. On April 12, 1961, a Soviet boy shared the news that Yuri Gagarin had become the first human to orbit Earth with a village shepherd. Gagarin's 108-minute flight aboard Vostok 1 made him a national hero and announced the Soviet Union's early lead in the space race in front of the world. In 1939, a farm family in Sheridan County, Kansas, posed at home while the 3 daughters wore dresses sewn from printed flour sacks. During the Great Depression, rural mothers reused feed and flour bags as fabric, turning household necessity into carefully made clothing. In 1954, the Brooks family gathered around their mother in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, after the home birth of Leslie Benjamin, their only son. He arrived after 13 daughters, making the crowded bedroom scene an unforgettable portrait of one of America's most remarkable families. Captured in 1945, Hungarian soldier Andras Toma spent 55 years in a Russian psychiatric hospital after staff mistook his Hungarian speech for gibberish. In 2000, a Slovak doctor recognized the language, allowing Toma to be identified, and finally returned home to Hungary at age 74. In 1943, Congressman Andrew J. May publicly revealed that Japanese depth charges were exploding too shallow to destroy many U.S. submarines in the Pacific. After Tokyo adjusted their settings, the disclosure was blamed for the loss of as many as 10 submarines and roughly 800 sailors. In February 1979, Iranian students celebrated the collapse of the monarchy while holding a portrait of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Their victory marked the triumph of the Islamic Revolution, which replaced Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi with a new religious republic after months of unrest. In 1904, Solomon Civils, inmate number 4339, was photographed at sentencing after being convicted of bringing liquor into Indian territory. He received 18 months in prison and a $10 fine, a punishment that reveals how strictly federal law controlled alcohol in the region. Until the 1930s, women on the Azorean island of Fayal wore the capote e capello, a black cloak with a towering hood that concealed much of the face. Its dramatic shape became one of the Azores' most distinctive costumes, offering modesty, privacy, and protection from Atlantic weather. In May 1958, British tanks, trucks, and armored vehicles used in the defeat of Nazi Germany lay stacked at a vast scrapyard in Hamburg. More than a decade after the war, the machines were still waiting to be dismantled and recycled into metal for Europe's post-war rebuilding efforts. In 1974, Jan Tikhonov photographed a compact apartment kitchen in the Latvian SSR, complete with enamel cabinets, a gas stove, and simple tableware. The carefully organized room reflects the standardized design and practical efficiency common in many Soviet urban homes of the 1970s. On October 22, 1962, President John F. Kennedy announced a naval blockade of Cuba after U.S. reconnaissance found Soviet nuclear missiles on the island. For 13 tense days, the world waited as American and Soviet forces moved closer than ever before to a nuclear confrontation. On July 20, 1944, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg planted a bomb inside Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia, but the blast failed to kill him. Believing Hitler was dead, Stauffenberg flew to Berlin to launch a coup, but he was arrested and executed by firing squad later. After Hurricane Andrew devastated South Florida in August 1992, a woman cooled off in a bathtub surrounded by shattered homes and debris. The storm destroyed more than 25,000 houses, caused about $27 billion in damage, and left entire neighborhoods across the region almost unrecognizable. On February 7, 1964, the Beatles arrived at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport to thousands of screaming fans and reporters. Their first American visit ignited Beatlemania across the United States and helped launch the British invasion that reshaped popular music. On May 18, 1980, Gary Rosenquist photographed Mount St. Helens pyroclastic cloud racing through the forest as he escaped in a pickup truck. The final frames were shot from the moving vehicle, preserving a terrifying close-range record of the eruption's fastest and most destructive force. On June 4, 1988, a train carrying explosives detonated near the railway station in Arzamas, Russia, sending a towering cloud over the city. Official reports listed 91 dead and 744 injured, while hundreds lost their homes. Amateur photographer Nikolai Bloshenkov captured the cloud above. In 1950, Georgia landowner John Wallace spoke from death row while appealing his conviction for killing sharecropper Wilson Turner over 2 stolen cows. Wallace claimed the gun fired accidentally, but he became one of the first white men in the South executed for killing a black man. In April 1970, the Apollo 13 crew photographed the shattered service module after jettisoning it before re-entry, revealing the damage caused by the oxygen tank explosion. The blast crippled the spacecraft, but all 3 astronauts survived after using the lunar module as a lifeboat. On November 3, 1941, a Soviet prisoner stood before Finnish troops and called for his commander to leave a fortified dugout. The tense scene unfolded during the continuation war, capturing a rare moment when surrender depended on one man persuading those still hidden below. After the December 7, 1988 earthquake in Spitak, Armenia, survivors warmed themselves near a modest fire beside the ruins of collapsed homes. The magnitude 6.8 disaster killed 25,000 people, left hundreds of thousands homeless, and devastated entire communities across northern Armenia. In May 1863, 5-year-old Fanny Virginia Cassiopeia Lawrence was photographed after being freed from slavery in Virginia under the era's racial one-drop rule. Her portrait was sold to raise money for abolitionist causes, turning the child into a national symbol of the campaign against slavery. In November 1933, a mob used a battering ram to storm the Santa Clara County Jail and seize John Holmes and Thomas Thurmond. The men had confessed to kidnapping and killing Brooke Hart and were dragged to St. James Park as California Governor James Rolfe openly praised the lynching. On March 7, 1948, 3 children in Hiroshima held debris taken from ruins left by the atomic bombing nearly 3 years earlier. The image shows how the city's youngest survivors still lived among the physical remains of the blast, while reconstruction slowly reshaped Hiroshima. In 1972, women in Derry's Cregan district brought tea and biscuits to an armed IRA volunteer positioned behind neighborhood barricades. The scene captured daily life during the Troubles, when gunmen, soldiers, and civilian families often shared the same heavily contested streets. In Sydney in 1921, 4 men accused of robbery posed for a police group portrait in tailored suits, polished shoes, and carefully placed hats. Their calm expressions and formal dress sharply contrast with the modern image of a criminal mugshot, making the photograph unusually striking. On August 8, 1991, the cargo ship Vlora reached Bari, Italy, carrying about 20,000 Albanians who had fled their collapsing communist state. Passengers crowded every deck and even climbed into the sea, creating one of the most powerful images of Europe's post-Cold War migration crisis. In June 1945, a Japanese prisoner sat behind barbed wire on Okinawa after the U.S. 6th Marine Division captured over 300 troops in one day. The image records a rare mass surrender near the battle's end, when many defenders had been ordered to resist capture rather than be taken alive. In 1945, German women held near Vilvoorde, outside Brussels, rested beside tents in a camp for former SS members, Luftwaffe personnel, and civilians. Their relaxed posture contrasts sharply with their status as prisoners during the uncertain months after Nazi Germany's collapse. On August 25, 1940, Arno Rudolphi and Anne Hayward married while suspended beneath parachutes at the New York World's Fair. A minister, best man, maid of honor, and 4 musicians joined them in mid-air, creating what was promoted as the world's first parachute wedding before a crowd. At Earlswood Asylum near Reigate, England, around 1904, residents with intellectual disabilities learned trades such as shoemaking and repair work. The institution reflected an era when people cruelly labeled idiots were routinely separated from society and confined for many years. In 1941, a young girl clung to her mother during the evacuation of children from Leningrad as German forces closed around the city. Their farewell came before a siege that would last nearly 900 days, leaving families separated and civilians trapped by hunger, cold, and bombardment. On April 16, 1945, USS Laffey survived 5 kamikaze strikes and 4 bomb hits while defending the radar picket line off Okinawa. The destroyer lost 32 men and suffered 71 wounded, yet remained afloat after an 80-minute attack that earned it the nickname the ship that would not die. On December 5, 1975, armed South Moluccan separatists occupied the Indonesian consulate in Amsterdam and displayed a blindfolded hostage on the balcony. The siege lasted nearly 2 weeks, drawing global attention to their campaign for an independent republic of South Maluku. In July 1941, motorcyclists of the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler rode a Zundap through a Soviet village shattered during Operation Barbarossa. The sensor concealed its license plate and unit markings, a small detail revealing how tightly Germany controlled released frontline images. On October 10, 1941, Soviet soldier M.S. Krutov, captured near Vyazma, wrote a farewell note asking his countrymen to remember those who endured captivity. Found decades later by search teams, the message became a record of hunger, humiliation, and resistance among prisoners of war. On April 30, 1980, protesters fought police in central Amsterdam during Queen Beatrix's inauguration, opposing severe housing shortages and the monarchy. The clashes became known as the Coronation Riots, as crowds raised barricades beneath the slogan, "No housing, no coronation." From 1960 to 1971, Edward Paynell, known as the Beast of Jersey, broke into homes wearing this handmade mask and attacked women and children. Arrested after crashing a stolen car, he was convicted of 13 offenses, ending an 11-year campaign of fear across the island. Between 1917 and 1920, Moscow's so-called Black Avengers terrorized the capital during the chaos of revolution and civil war. The gang was blamed for dozens of killings, with police officers among its most frequent targets as state authority collapsed across the city and its suburbs. After Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida in August 1992, a woman cooled off in a bathtub, surrounded by shattered homes and debris. The Category 5 storm destroyed more than 25,000 homes, caused roughly $27 billion in damage, and left entire communities almost unrecognizable. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge collapsed during rush hour between West Virginia and Ohio, sending cars into the icy Ohio River and killing 46 people. Investigators traced the disaster to one corroded eyebar, prompting major reforms in bridge inspections across the United States. After France's liberation in 1944, women accused of collaborating with German occupiers were shaved, marked, and paraded through crowded streets. Known as les tondeuses, many were punished without trial, sometimes for little more than having had a relationship with a German soldier. Robert Maudsley killed 4 men between 1974 and 1978, 3 while already confined in British institutions. After 2 prison killings in one day, authorities placed him in extreme isolation in 1983. The tabloid claim that he practiced cannibalism was never proven. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in the bedroom of her Brentwood home in Los Angeles, age 36. Sleeping pills were found nearby, and the coroner ruled her death a probable suicide caused by acute barbiturate poisoning. This police image records the room as officers found it. After the atomic bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, intense heat scorched the ground around this bicycle, leaving its outline visible against the lighter surface. The image became a haunting record of how thermal radiation marked ordinary objects within seconds of the blast. On September 24, 1977, a black man and a Ku Klux Klan member fought over a wooden pole during a violent confrontation in downtown Mobile, Alabama. The clash erupted around a Klan demonstration, capturing the intense racial hostility that drew protesters, police, and crowds into the city center. On October 23, 1952, 4 subway trains collided near Mosholu Parkway in the Bronx, leaving several cars crushed and tangled across the tracks. Rescuers climbed through the wreckage as the extraordinary pileup brought one of New York's busiest transit lines to a sudden, chaotic halt. Born in Sicily in 1889, Francesco Lentini had 3 legs and 16 toes because of a partially absorbed conjoined twin. He became a celebrated circus performer in the United States, mastering soccer, cycling, and rope skipping during a remarkable career lasting more than 40 years. On February 1, 1951, KTLA broadcast an atomic test from Nevada, giving television viewers their first live glimpse of a nuclear explosion. The station filmed the rising cloud from roughly 75 miles away, turning a secretive weapon of the early Cold War into a public spectacle. Around 1900, a hunter and local helpers restrained a huge crocodile beside the Zambezi River after dragging it from the water. The carefully staged trophy photograph reflects a colonial era when dangerous African wildlife was hunted for prestige, publicity, and personal status. On February 3, 1931, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck Hawke's Bay, destroying much of Napier and Hastings in less than 3 minutes. New Zealand's deadliest natural disaster killed 256 people, injured thousands, sparked major fires, and permanently lifted parts of the coastline. Around 1900, fishermen at Port Chalmers, New Zealand, displayed an 18-foot shark on a wagon before a large crowd gathered at the harbor. The staged trophy photograph captures the scale of early commercial fishing and the public fascination with giant marine predators in the region. On February 14, 1942, Japanese paratroopers boarded a Mitsubishi KY-57 transport, known to the Allies as Topsy, before the assault on Palembang, Sumatra. Their airborne landing helped capture key oil refineries and airfields, giving Japan a vital foothold in the Dutch East Indies. Born in Hunan, China in 1964, Zheng Jinlian reached 8 feet 1 inch, or 246.3 centimeters, due to a pituitary disorder that caused extreme growth. By her teens, she was the tallest living person ever recorded, yet remained an avid reader who helped support her farming family before dying at 17. In April 1988, a captive wearing only a dog collar escaped Robert Berdella's Hyde Park home by leaping from a second-floor window and reaching a nearby meter reader. His testimony led police inside, exposing evidence of prolonged abuse and ending Berdella's hidden crimes. In 1946, patients sat in a crowded ward at an Ohio State psychiatric hospital, many appearing exhausted, withdrawn, or distressed. The image reflects the severe overcrowding and limited treatment that defined many American mental institutions in the post-war era before major reforms began. On October 21, 1994, Seoul's Seongsu Bridge collapsed into the Han River during morning rush hour, taking vehicles and a crowded bus with it. The failure killed 32 people and exposed dangerous construction defects and weak inspections during South Korea's rapid urban expansion. In 1992, residents of besieged Sarajevo queued beside a stream with plastic containers after shelling disrupted the city's water system. During the 1,425-day siege, collecting water became a dangerous daily task, often performed under sniper fire and artillery attacks. After Fushimi Castle fell in 1600, floorboards stained during Tori Modotada's final stand were later installed as ceilings in several nearby Kyoto temples. The wood still bears dark footprints and marks linked to 380 samurai who died after resisting a far larger army for 11 days. In February 2000, Russian soldiers rested among the ruins of Grozny as the final major fighting of the Second Chechen War devastated the city. Entire districts had been reduced to rubble, while thousands of civilians were killed or displaced during months of brutal urban combat. On May 8, 1945, a Dutch woman accused of collaborating with German occupation authorities was shaved and covered in tar in Amsterdam. Such public punishment spread across liberated Europe, where suspected collaborators were often humiliated by crowds before any formal trial. After the atomic bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, bridge railings shielded strips of asphalt from the intense thermal flash, leaving dark outlines behind. Investigators marked the direction of the blast beside them. These were heat shadows, not the remains of a vaporized person. On July 12, 2007, U.S. Apache helicopters fired on a group in Baghdad, killing 12 people, including 2 Reuters employees. Chelsea Manning leaked the cockpit video in 2010. She received a 35-year prison sentence in 2013, later commuted by President Barack Obama in 2017. In 1958, 16-year-old Leslie Arnold showed Nebraska police where he had buried his parents after killing them at their Omaha home. Sentenced to life, he escaped in 1967, lived for decades in Australia under a false identity, and was identified only after his death through DNA. Sylvia Porter became a celebrated sideshow performer after a condition caused extreme swelling and chronic pain in her legs and feet. Known for her warmth and confidence, she defended fellow performers as sideshows declined and refused cold-weather tours that worsened her condition. In 1835, Ngati Mutunga and Ngati Tama invaded the Chatham Islands, killing about 300 Moriori and enslaving most survivors. Bound by Nunuku's law of nonviolence, the Moriori chose not to fight, and their population was devastated for generations. The last full Moriori person died in 1933. On March 6, 1981, Marianne Bachmeier smuggled a pistol into a Lübeck courtroom and shot Klaus Grabowski during his trial for murdering her 7-year-old daughter, Anna. She fired 7 times before surrendering, making the case one of Germany's most controversial acts of vigilante justice. During the Vietnam War, Viet Cong forces concealed pits like this beneath leaves and thin coverings, lining them with sharpened bamboo or metal stakes. A soldier's own weight triggered the fall, making these simple traps terrifyingly effective at slowing patrols and spreading fear. In the early 1900s, Police at the Nizhny Novgorod Fair photographed women accused of working as unregistered prostitutes, each marked with a number for identification. Russia tightly regulated sex work at the time, requiring police registration, medical checks, and official permits. In February 1937, an aircraft photographed the Danane concentration camp in colonial Somalia, where prisoners endured extreme heat, hunger, and disease. Even fascist inspectors called the conditions disastrous, and records indicate that more than half of those detained there died. On April 19, 1993, fire consumed the Branch Davidian compound near Waco, Texas, ending a tense 51-day standoff with federal agents. 76 people died inside, including leader David Koresh and many children, making the siege one of the most controversial events in modern American history. On April 18, 1926, 5 massive lava fronts from Mauna Loa advanced toward Hupaloa on Hawaii's Kona coast, expanding as they poured into the Pacific. Powerful earthquakes shook the district, while police guarded nearby roads as crowds arrived to witness the eruption at close range. On March 27, 1977, KLM Flight 4805 began its takeoff roll in dense fog at Tenerife's Los Rodeos Airport and struck Pan Am Flight 1736 on the runway. The collision killed 583 people. Only 61 aboard the Pan Am jet survived, making it the deadliest accident in aviation history. In the years after the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, young patients from contaminated Soviet regions waited for treatment at Cuba's Tarará Medical Center. Beginning in 1990, Cuba treated thousands of affected children there, offering long-term care for illnesses linked to radiation exposure. From May 3rd to 5th, 1971, Washington police arrested more than 12,000 anti-war protesters attempting to disrupt the federal government and force an end to the Vietnam War. Many detainees were never charged, and courts later ruled that thousands of arrests had violated constitutional rights. On May 8, 1902, Mount Pelée erupted on Martinique and destroyed Saint-Pierre in minutes, killing nearly 30,000 people in one of history's deadliest volcanic disasters. Prisoner Ludger Silberus survived inside a thick-walled cell, becoming the most famous survivor of the blast. Mary Ann Bevan, pictured with her children, developed acromegaly after adulthood, causing dramatic changes to her face and body. After her husband died, she entered sideshows as the ugliest woman in the world, using the income to support her 4 children alone. In 1935, heiress Ann Cooper Hewitt underwent a sterilization procedure in San Francisco while hospitalized for appendicitis, allegedly on her mother's orders. She later sued, exposing how eugenics laws allowed families and doctors to control women's bodies without meaningful consent. In the 1920s, Soviet GPU agents arrested an illegal distiller beside his homemade still during a crackdown on unlicensed alcohol production. Moonshining remained widespread despite state controls, as rural poverty and shortages kept illicit spirits in constant demand across the USSR. In 1901, temperance activist Carrie Nation posed with the hatchet she used to smash bottles, mirrors, and furniture inside Kansas saloons. Arrested more than 30 times, she turned destruction, fiery speeches, and public spectacle into a national crusade against alcohol. On January 8, 1932, Korean independence activist Lee Bong-chang threw a grenade at Emperor Hirohito's procession near Tokyo's Sakuratamon Gate. The blast missed the emperor, and Lee was arrested at the scene, convicted, and executed by Japanese authorities 9 months later. On August 26, 1944, Parisians celebrating liberation scattered across Place de la Concorde when gunfire erupted from a nearby building. Although German forces had surrendered the capital, isolated snipers remained active, turning the Allied victory parade into a scene of sudden panic. In April 1945, thousands of German prisoners captured by U.S. airborne troops crowded a field inside the Ruhr Pocket, Germany's major industrial stronghold. The encirclement ended with more than 300,000 German soldiers surrendering, collapsing organized resistance in Western Germany. This final known photograph of Andre the Giant was taken in Paris in January 1993, where he had traveled for his father's funeral. 3 days later, the 46-year-old wrestling legend died in his sleep from congestive heart failure linked to acromegaly, the condition behind his immense size. Roy "Rocky" Dennis, pictured with his mother Rusty, lived with craniodiaphyseal dysplasia, an extremely rare disorder that caused rapid growth of his skull and facial bones. He died in 1978 at only 16, and his remarkable life later inspired the Hollywood film Mask, released in 1985. In 1966, 17-year-old Franca Viola became the first Italian woman to reject a rehabilitating marriage after being kidnapped and assaulted. Her refusal exposed a law that let attackers avoid punishment by marrying their victims, a provision Italy then finally abolished in 1981. In 1931, Joe Raggio, once promoted as one of the heaviest men alive, sat at a table with a young child during a public appearance. His immense size made him a sideshow attraction in an era when people with unusual bodies were displayed for paying audiences across America and Europe. Around 1933, a young British princess and members of her family were filmed at Balmoral, raising their arms in a gesture resembling the Nazi salute. The brief home movie resurfaced in 2015, igniting debate over its meaning and the royal family's attitudes before the Second World War. On June 14, 1941, Soviet authorities deported about 10,000 Estonians in sealed cattle cars, separating many men from their families. Women and children were sent to remote settlements in Siberia and Kazakhstan, where hunger, disease, forced labor, and extreme cold killed thousands. Born in 1849 to an enslaved 13-year-old girl and plantation owner David Dixon, Amanda America Dixon later inherited his vast Georgia estate. After relatives challenged the will, she won in court and became one of the wealthiest black women in the American South at the time. During France's colonial rule in Algeria, a French soldier escorted 2 Algerian men bound together by a rope, likely after their detention. The image captures the coercion and mass arrests that marked the Algerian War, which lasted from 1954 until independence from French rule in 1962. On April 20, 2008, Brazilian priest Adelir Antonio de Carli rose from Paranaguá beneath 1,000 helium balloons to fund a rest stop for truck drivers. Strong winds swept him over the Atlantic, where contact was lost. His remains were discovered off Brazil nearly 3 months later. Dennis Rader, later identified as the BTK killer, dances the hokey pokey at a wedding years before his arrest in 2005. The cheerful scene became deeply unsettling in hindsight, showing how a church leader and city employee concealed a violent double life for decades. When 10-year-old Florence Irene Ford died, her mother requested a small window beside the coffin and steps leading into the grave. Located in Natchez City Cemetery, Mississippi, the unusual tomb allowed her grieving mother to sit near the child she could not bear to leave. In 1941, at age 23, Rosemary Kennedy underwent a lobotomy authorized by her father, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., without her informed consent. The operation caused profound permanent disabilities, and she spent most of the next 6 decades in institutional care, largely out of public view. In 1950, 22-year-old Corporal Leonard Hayworth wept after his unit ran out of ammunition, and most of his men were lost during the Korean War. Photographer David Douglas Duncan captured the moment. Hayworth later returned to the front and was killed before the war ended. On May 18, 1980, players continued a local baseball game in Washington as Mount St. Helens sent a vast ash column into the sky behind them. The eruption killed 57 people, flattened hundreds of square miles of forest, and became the deadliest volcanic event in United States history. On June 11, 1963, Buddhist monk Thich Quang Juk self-immolated in Saigon to protest the South Vietnamese government's persecution of Buddhists. Malcolm Brown's photograph shocked the world, increased pressure on President Ngo Dinh Diem, and became an enduring image of the Vietnam era. On February 11, 1988, a woman in Vsevolozhsk, near Leningrad, reported strange knocking before a window suddenly shattered inside her home. A photographer documented the damage the next day, but one frame appeared to contain a shadowy female figure, creating a famous Soviet-era ghost story. On April 15, 1945, newly liberated prisoners at Bergen-Belsen waited in line for food after British troops entered the camp. Life photographer George Roger documented the scene with the 11th Armored Division, creating an early visual record of the camp's liberation. The fall of Saigon. Desperate civilians crowded the gates of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon as they attempt to flee with American troops. This scene is reminiscent of 2021's fall of Kabul, where tens of thousands of Afghan civilians attempted to flee as American troops withdrew from the country. In 1944, Lena Baker said she shot her white employer, Ernest Knight, in self-defense after he held her captive and threatened her during a struggle. After a one-day trial before an all-white male jury, she was executed in Georgia in 1945 and posthumously pardoned 60 years later. On January 30, 1945, the German liner Wilhelm Gustloff was torpedoed in the Baltic Sea by the Soviet submarine S-13 while evacuating civilians and military personnel from East Prussia. More than 9,000 people died, making it the deadliest maritime disaster in recorded history. Around 1914, New York Central Locomotive 1063 lay overturned beside a stream after a derailment as a wrecking derrick prepared to lift it. Steam Locomotive 2059 powered the recovery train, capturing the difficult and dangerous work of early railroad salvage crews. In 1978, photojournalist J. Ross Baughman photographed a black detainee with a rope around his neck while mounted Rhodesian security men watched nearby. The series became fiercely disputed, but it remains a stark record of coercion during the final years of the Rhodesian Bush War. In 1954, patients at a Paris psychiatric hospital underwent prolonged bath therapy, a common treatment intended to reduce agitation and distress. The tubs were used for hydrotherapy and restraint, not specifically to treat erotomania or female sexuality, as later myths often claim. In 1929, Armenian orphans from Kayseri arrived at a Beirut orphanage after years of displacement caused by the Armenian genocide. Many had lost parents, homes, and entire communities, while Lebanon became a major refuge for Armenian children who survived mass deportation. On June 17, 1967, China detonated its first hydrogen bomb at the Lopnur test site, with a yield of 3.3 megatons only 32 months after its first atomic test. Soldiers raised copies of Mao's Little Red Book beneath the cloud as China became the world's fourth thermonuclear power. On December 15, 1981, a car bomb destroyed the Iraqi embassy in Beirut, killing 61 people and injuring more than 100. The attack, attributed to Iraq's Islamic Dawa Party, also killed Ambassador Abdulrazak Lafta and became one of the earliest major embassy bombings in modern history. In 1941, a captured Red Army commissar was forced by German soldiers to dig his own grave, while the original caption identified him as Jewish. The photograph reflects the Nazi policy of executing Soviet political officers and Jews immediately after capture on the Eastern Front. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?